to say a few words.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. And I'm like Joanne, both delighted to be here, delighted to hear about the work that's gone on with this report, and also, like Joanne, I think have campaigned and talked about and attempted to find solutions to this issue over many years now. So I think this report arrives at a very timely moment for the debate, because what the debate is about now is not whether we go ahead with a very substantial retrofit program for houses. We know that we've got some of the worst insulated and energy efficient homes in Europe, have had for a very long time. We know that a comprehensive retrofit program for UK housing would be probably one of the most important things we could do in terms of getting to our zero climate change targets, in terms of just wholesale lifting the energy efficiency and hence the use of energy in homes up by very substantial degrees. And we know that, among other things, that program could, for example, effectively eliminate fuel poverty in the UK. So it would be a win-win for a number of positions at the same time. And we've already got targets for the wished for state of UK homes, as it were, by 2035, indeed going forward to 2030. I've put forward target suggestions that UK homes should be at band C, SAT rating band C by 2035, which is quite a way to go in terms of what we know again about the numbers of homes, particularly in the private rented sector, that are way below that level of general energy efficiency. And the other thing we know, of course, is that the attempts that have been put forward to start work on this issue, as Brian, you've mentioned yourself, have been conspicuous by their crashing ineffectiveness. So we know what not to do. We know we don't start real deal. We know we don't try and go for a organised method of trying to go home by home to pick out changes householders want to go forward with, and we don't hire an American consultancy to that process.
Yes, I'm sorry. I don't know if it's just me. I'm missing. It's a connection. It may be my connection, but I don't know if others are. I'm missing one or two of your words. Yeah.
Well, yeah. It's probably a good thing that you're missing one or two.
Well, just shout out the most important ones.
Yeah, I'll shout out the most important ones. Here we go. Yeah. So we also know now not what to do and what not to do, and I think we're coming to a much greater consensus now that we need to do this firstly on the basis of a mass campaign, but that mass campaign needs to be run and led and organised locally. You can't do it just from the top by organisation, and that really goes into the message of what it is we need to do at local level, who we need to do that with, and how the public are going to take that on board when those things are put in the right place. And that does mean that this is done by local builders, local trusted people who have good connections with the local community and what they're doing. It means it has to be organised by probably local authorities running the overall scheme. Some people will, with very long memories, will go back to the old housing general action areas and housing improvement areas. So you could imagine having an energy efficiency improvement area, but run on the basis of local builders, local tradesmen, local skills coming in and doing the work. And I think under those circumstances, you'd have a step change trust in the process. But we know we've got to be. It has to be done on the basis of proper funding, of it's an idea that this is a public good that we're doing here.
Alan, I'm going to cut you short because we've only got 1 hour and I need to bring in other speakers. Are you okay? I think you've got one message across there.
Well,
it sounds like you're fully in support.
But I think just my conclusion is to solid welcome for this report, and certainly from my point of view, and understanding I'll work as closely as possible that I can with the Federation to make sure we bring this about in short order. Fantastic.
Alan, thank you very much for that. That's good to have your support for this, because we're going to need all the friends we can. So if I may, now in terms of balance, I want to bring in the Right Honourable Philip Dunne MP, who's chair of the House of Commons Environmental Audit Committee. So if I may, Philip, if you'd like to come in.
Thank you very much, Brian. And if you'll excuse me, I'm going to keep my camera off because I've got limited signal. I hope you can hear me. I'm taking from your side
very clearly, which is great.
Excellent, thank you. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to join you today. And I'd like to start really by thanking the FMB for the support that you've given, and you in particular, Brian, for giving evidence to the EAC inquiry into energy efficiency in existing homes that we ran last year and had oral sessions earlier this year. And I've got a couple of points to make really before, so I know you wanted to hand this over for a more general discussion, but I think Alan was spot on in one of his opening remarks by saying that we're really beyond the issue of the usual political ding-dong about whether we need to do this. It's all about the practicalities and how. We have a political consensus, certainly in the House of Commons, and I think more widely, that we've got to achieve great strides in decarbonising energy use in our home and making our homes much more energy efficient in order to achieve net zero Britain. The existing housing stock accounts for 30% of energy usage in the UK and 20% of greenhouse gas emissions. And unless we can get that right down, we do not achieve net zero Britain under any timetable, and certainly not by 2050. So it's an essential task and a very challenging one. I'd like to sort of focus my remarks on what practical steps need to be taken in order to deliver a decarbonisation of our homes. And here the lessons that we learnt from our inquiry on the EAC into the role of the construction industry, and in particular the SMEs as represented by the FMB, could not be overstated. The Green Homes Grant Scheme which we applauded the intent of when launched this time last year as part of the summer economic package for recovery from COVID, was the first time the government had indicated it was willing to put hard cash on the table to assist the homeowners who do not have energy efficient homes, the nearly 11 million in England who are in that category of EPC D or less, and the government scheme of £1.5 million for homeowners had not been foreshadowed in the manifesto on which the Conservative government was elected. There was there was £9.2 billion, and that was focused on social housing and public buildings. Practically nothing earmarked for homeowners. So this was a very big step forward last year, and a very necessary step to encourage the work that needs to be done. Unfortunately, it was poorly implemented, and when we produced our report in the spring, we were recommending it should be significantly overhauled and extended, and a week later, unfortunately, it was scrapped. So the focus now has to be on what replaces it, and the government has announced a couple of schemes, but none of the detail of those schemes. One we're hoping will be in place by the end of the year, and one by next spring. And we look to the spending review and the now slightly less imminent heat and building strategy that we had been expecting well throughout this year, and now it looks like it's the autumn. Whether that's September or October, we don't know, but I would anticipate it will be before the spending review, and that will provide the structure for any support, and hopefully the spending review will provide consistency of funding, which is so critical to provide confidence to both consumers and contractors that any successor scheme to Green Homes Grant will both endure and be pragmatic and practical, so that it can be accessed by consumers and the contractors can have confidence that it will work. So I think that's the sort of overall ambition of where we need to get to. I would say my sort of second point is that it is one important lesson to learn from the Green Homes Grant scheme is that government must engage with the contractor community to devise a scheme that will have confidence amongst those who are going to be tasked with doing the work. And that's not just the major house builders, because they're going to be focused on delivering the new homes that the country needs. It's going to be the smaller builders and members of the FMB in particular who will have such an important role to play. And one of the most striking bits of evidence that we received, Brian, from you and your organisation was that of your, if I get the numbers roughly right, 7,500 members, I think you told us that only 3 had engaged with the Trustmark scheme and qualified as to be able to install measures under the Green Homes Grant scheme. Now, 3 out of 7,500 by any measure is a low take-up, and it is absolutely essential that your members have sufficient confidence in any successor scheme that people will get engaged, and that requires in particular encouraging the existing workforce to get upskilled or reskilled and trained to be able to install the electrification heating systems of the future. Because the other statistic that is in my head is that there are at the moment, I think, 100,000 plus companies who are and a lot of that includes sole traders who are certified to install gas heating systems, but only about 1,200 companies were certified to install under the Trustmark scheme electric heat pumps, and that the workforce are there, but it is not it's not like a plumbing job. It requires a new level of skill to be able to, in particular, calculate the energy requirements of a home that is going to be heated by a heat pump, and to advise on the insulation that's going to be required to make it work properly. So this is quite a significant task, recruiting the people, training them up to do this work, and to do it at scale requires a wholehearted commitment of the industry, and that's why I will be reading your report with great interest, and we'll look forward to continuing to engage in this debate through our committee, through this Parliament.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And it's encouraging, actually, we're seeing a sort of consensus across the political spectrum to actually create this retrofit market. So as you mentioned, Philip, interested to see what the findings are of the report. So I think it's really important now we hand over to Dr. Gavin Killip, who is going to present the findings of the report, which is obviously are key in terms of next steps and what we will want to do afterwards in lobbying stakeholders and the government. So if I may, Gavin, may I hand over to you?
Thank you very much, Brian, and good afternoon, everyone. I have got some slides which I will now endeavour to share with you in the usual lockdown way. Can you see that?
Not just yet.
Yep.
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right, so here we are launching the report called Building on Our Strengths, a market transformation approach to energy retrofit in UK homes. There were 6 of us involved in writing this report, 5 of us academics, myself, Tina Fawcett and Marina Tapuzzi from the University of Oxford, Alice Owen from the University of Leeds, Faye Wade from the University of Edinburgh, and we've also been very lucky to have Chris Joffe involved, and Chris chairs a body called the Independent Implementation Group on Residential Decarbonisation with the Welsh Government, and has been involved in retrofit with Arup for many years. Between us, we have lots of years of experience of retrofit policy, research and practice. So the aim of the report is really to explore the integration. Our key question is, how can the market for repair, maintenance and improvement, which we term RMI, be transformed so that opportunities for energy retrofit are integrated into everyday practice and market activity, not just one-off schemes and special treatments, but always, every time, whenever there's an opportunity, by and large, it's taken. At the headline conclusions, Joanne has already mentioned this, there's no simple fix. It's not just a question of money or just a question of regulation or just a question of training. We need a cross-sectoral systems approach. We need a long-term joined-up policy approach. There is a need for finance and fiscal measures, but that's actually relates back to quality assurance in the workforce and other things, which I'll talk about. We need improved quality and competence across the board. And there's several unknowns still and several opportunities for innovation, particularly in things like business models. So we are advocating some real world field trials to test new ideas. And this is actually being done to some extent in Wales and Scotland already. So there's potential for learning from one another as well. Energy retrofit gets defined in various ways. We choose to talk of it as a process. So it's a process of making changes to buildings and the technical systems in buildings so that the energy consumption and the associated CO2 emissions are reduced in line with energy and climate policy goals. That definition does not include a particular standard or a particular level of ambition, but what it does allow is for that level of ambition to change over time. And I think that's important when we're talking about market transformation. As has already been alluded to, we're not just talking about climate and energy policy. Retrofitting of homes has multiple benefits, social and economic as well as environmental. It can make homes more affordable, more comfortable and attractive. It can improve the health and well-being of residents quite significantly. It's good for cutting heating bills, and it can support quite large numbers of jobs across all regions of the UK. But there is a key role for the small builders. We've heard this from previous speakers. And small builders' voices are typically absent in the policy debates that I get involved in around climate and energy policy. Why are they important? Well, because the repair, maintenance and improvement market is worth £29 billion a year. And myself and a couple others have estimated that about 40% of that is a good trigger for doing retrofit. So that's £11 billion of private sector money, mostly private sector money, being spent on buildings as a matter of course, which could become the catalyst for retrofit. That's a huge amount of money, and we need to tap into that potential. The trouble is that the opportunities are being missed, not taken, by and large. Small builders have influence over project design and specification, and they can influence customers. But as we said before, they can't create the market on their own. So they are constrained as well as influential. And what we're arguing for here really is a much closer alignment between the RMI market, the mainstream building activity, and retrofit. Energy needs to become part and parcel of builders' daily working lives. Now, no country in the world has cracked the retrofit conundrum. So we take our inspiration from a few places where you have to make some careful thinking happen about how we implement this. But the market transformation approach is one which has worked for appliance markets in Britain and across Europe and in other countries around the world. And we're asking the question, could we adapt this approach for the service market of retrofit? Admittedly, a very different kind of market. But there are three broad policy areas that work for market transformation. And the idea here is that you have a toolkit. So you have mandatory minimum standards, trailed to industry with sufficient time for them to gear up their investment, information to consumers, and we're all familiar with energy labelling these days, and also financial incentives, particularly in the early years, to get the market from its very early immature phase. And people often look at the energy label and assume that the information is the key thing. Actually, the key thing is that combination of policies. Behind the label, there are some mandatory standards and there's some financial incentives at work. Another key ingredient of the approach is that you have good quality technical and market analysis. So the policymakers understand the market that they seek to change. That's a really important point. And it's also built on long-term engagement with industry. So that could possibly work in this space. I'm not going to dwell too long on this diagram, but it's not just the builders. Understanding the sector is key, and how builders work and the influences that they have and the constraints they have, for example, in their supply chains, is also really important. So I'll just highlight a couple of things in here. If a builder is asked to do something innovative and the product takes 2 or 3 weeks to arrive, that could easily have a knock-on effect on their flow of work over time, with potentially disgruntled customers down the line. So there's a kind of built-in conservatism with a small c to use products which are available around the corner tomorrow. It can be overcome, but it's not easy to overcome it. And then the other thing I'll point to is building control. Building control inspectors have, we've lost more than a quarter of the workforce since 2010 because of local authority funding cuts. But the builders themselves actually value building control not just as a form of compliance, but also as a source of technical advice. So there are some parts of the system which are there, but have been undermined or not supported sufficiently. So there's an element of strengthening that needs to go on as well. Retrofit is essentially, I would say in one word, it's about quality. It carries a certain amount of risk. Doing it wrong does carry risks. And we need to both seize the opportunities, manage the risks, and we achieve that by having some kind of quality assurance. It's an ongoing process. Retrofit isn't you just do it once. So we have a diagram here which is a wheel. It's the cycle of repair and maintenance over the life of a building. The opportunities to introduce retrofit can come at any stage, whether it's a building is just being bought, just being sold, changing life circumstances of the household, etc. When we look at retrofit projects, there's several innovations, possible new roles amongst the delivery partners. Some of you will be familiar with the development of standards for retrofit coordinators and other things, but that's certainly the scope for broadening that a lot. Retrofit requires some kind of integrated plan. The work doesn't have to be done necessarily all at once, but there does need to be a well-informed plan behind what needs to be done when. Skills and knowledge are required across the whole project team. It's not just the preserve of one person, but there are strong arguments for reforming the way in which we do education and training in this sector in this country. Retrofit also typically has more formal means of assessment for performance than RMI works, which tends to be ad hoc using rules of thumb. And finally, it's important that we have some mechanism for feeding back the learning between different stages. So when a project is completed, we don't just walk away and assume that everything works as planned. There needs to be an element of learning, particularly, as I said before, in the early years. Minimum standards, you're familiar with the idea of buildings having minimum standards. I want to also talk about builders having minimum standards. So we think that building regulations should be tightened regularly over time. That has slipped a bit recently. Building control should be properly resourced to do the compliance checks, and their advisory role is a potentially strong part of the solution. But actually, we also need minimum qualification requirements for the workforce so that the training is not an optional extra nice to have, but there is some license to trade force. And we argue, as does the FMB, that this should apply at the level of the firm rather than the individual. And some kind of accreditation, national standards of competence underpin workforce accreditation. And that will give us some kind of quality based on training, accreditation and compliance all working together. We've talked a little bit about the energy performance certificate, different EPC band ratings. I would go further than to say we need to encourage these things to be better. Actually, we just need to make the system behind the energy performance certificate more accurate. It needs to be based on good quality building surveys, not on SAP. The ratings need to form the basis of new regulations, and those regulations have to be strong. We're talking about banning the sale or rental of property that is non-compliant. We've seen the beginnings of some of that, for example, with the minimum energy efficiency standards for private rented sector, but the loopholes and exemptions are too easy in that scheme. Some kind of logbook or passport, if you want, could record the history of the works carried out in each property. And that would be linked then to the rating, which is linked to the standard in relation to property sales and rentals. Smart metering could play a role. I don't think it's essential, but it could be there to help with automatic data collection in some form. Moving on to finance, we need some financing schemes. They need to be fair and affordable. They need to be administratively straightforward if the builders are going to be able to administer them. They need to be sufficient to pay for good quality retrofit. People have talked about exactly how this should be made up, but some combination of loans, grants and tax incentives are all indicated. And we also know there's some very good work being done recently by the Green Finance Institute looking at different potential models for finance. We know that the banks and the private lenders see a potential market here, but what we see again and again is two things that trip up their participating wholeheartedly is the lack of good quality systems for building energy rating and the lack of good quality systems for workforce accreditation. So even the schemes for bringing about finance take us back to these issues about the workforce and the quality and the competence. Now, there's been various debates about reducing VAT on repair and maintenance works over the years. The FMB has argued for it, and one of its key arguments is about stimulating economic growth in the recovery. I take a slightly different view on it, that actually one of the key elements of VAT is that you're using the tax incentive to disincentivize cash-in-hand deals. And that links to the need for an accredited workforce. So things that happen in the parallel economy carried out by unlicensed builders would be less attractive if the VAT rate were reduced. That's the key argument there. So back to my conclusions with a little bit extra. There's more detail in the report, which will be released, I believe, at 1 minute past midnight tonight. But the conclusions broadly, no simple fix. We're not looking at a silver bullet. It needs a cross-sectoral systems approach. We need long-term joined-up policy. It needs to involve the various different stakeholders. SME builders are a key stakeholder group, but there are others. We need a way of financing retrofit. That also could include fiscal measures, not just loans, grants, and other forms of financing. The quality and the competence of the workforce is really important to get right. We need regulated minimum standards for buildings and for the builders who are doing the work on them. And because there's so much uncertainty about it and so much potential for improving processes, some real-world field trials to test new ideas would be a really good idea. And I think overall, let's be honest and say that this programme will take years to bring about. It needs to be got right. It needs not to be rushed. And that is, in some ways, a crazy thing to say when we're also talking about the climate emergency. But I would argue that every initiative that we see which fails to get it right actually causes further delay and simply wastes more time. So it could take years to get it right. We should start now, but it won't take decades. Please join the debate. You'll get the report from midnight, and there's various hashtags and ways to engage there. Thank you very much.
Gavin, thank you very much for that comprehensive review of the findings and the report. So I think that's been extremely helpful for setting the framework for questions that hopefully will follow on from what we've said today so far. Obviously, you know, the FMB will be very keen that those findings find their way into government, and that there is a cross-party consensus about the need to retrofit. And as you mentioned, that long-term policy model is definitely needed. As I said at the beginning about the piecemeal approach, which I think has been so damaging in creating the market, let alone any transformation. So I'm going to open this up now to the floor to see what the reaction is from our guests here this afternoon. Does anyone want to put some questions to Gavin or to anyone else who has spoken today? And if you do so, can you just raise your electronic hand and I will bring you in. Okay, so the first hand to go up, Catherine, would you like to come in?
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Brian. Great report, having just read through it very quickly. Something I've picked up in my own research on exactly this topic, which Gavin and colleagues will have heard me mentioning before, but I'm not sure it's been brought out. It's not in contradiction at all to what you've been saying, but it's an additional point. It's the role of those offering general building services. I've been considering this a lot more in the light of the work on PAS 2035 in the BSI Retrofit Standards Task Group, which I'm involved in as well. And it's made me think about it in quite a lot of detail. You could say that the general builder by default carries out quite a lot of the roles that are specified in PAS 2035, but particularly the retrofit coordinator role. To some extent, the design and the specification work, and liaising with the householder, so to some extent the advice work as well. But the point is that I want to make is that this role is still not catered for in construction education. And I think we need a qualification for the RMI general builder, which fully incorporates low carbon retrofit, because that's what the builders are having to do anyway. So why are we not training them and supporting them? I think this fits in with what you've presented around market transformation and the need for drivers and the enabling mechanisms. And it's a bit that we keep missing in the enabling mechanisms. So I know FMB did bring that into the campaign that you had on licensing. And I really just wanted to raise it again, because I think it keeps getting forgotten. And yes. I'm sorry it's not a proper question, but I would like to hear responses to that.
I think it's a really important view, actually. So I don't know, Gavin, are you happy to respond?
Yes. Hello, Catherine. You've strayed into one of my favourite topics, education for training and skills. I think we can learn a lot from looking at other countries, because the UK approach to education and training in this sector, well, it's all voluntary, so you can have a job as a builder without having any formal training at all. Now, some on-the-job learning, experiential learning is useful, but not all of it is useful for retrofit. Other countries do it much better. So you have a foundation course in how energy and buildings work, which everyone does, and it lasts for months or a year, not for 5 minutes or a week. And you learn all of that before you specialise. Whereas in this country, what we have is a course for carpenters or a course for electricians. And retrofit is all about quality and integration. And yet we have very, very fragmented roles in the workforce. And those roles, that role fragmentation is reinforced at every turn by the training. So I think there's quite a big agenda for change in terms of reforming vocational education and training for this goal of retrofit. Others may disagree, but
any other viewpoints on that? Because it is an interesting one, and certainly the FMB has always been arguing the need to actually recognise what is a builder, because there's no definition. It's not licensed, registered. Anyone can be a builder, which of course is a great concern. No, Okay. Any other aspects of the report that people want to pick up on? Because Gavin was talking very much about the need for quality, minimum standards, and field trials. So, any other aspect of the report that anyone would like to raise? No, we're very quiet. So, Simon.
Hi, Brian. Thank you for that.
Hi, thank you.
It's just a question, really, actually, that feeds back generally that obviously there's been a huge amount of work on the whole house approach to retrofit, which I think, Gavin, you support anyway, from what I remember, in terms of moving forward, that we take this in a logical process. But I guess one of the challenges we've seen is that with RMI being so busy currently, and the lack of skilled people within the sector, there isn't the drive for those organisations to move. So a huge number of probably the general builders probably wouldn't look at qualification or new forms of accreditation. So we've got to overcome that in the short term as well as the longer term. And it's how we achieve that.
I'm happy to respond to that briefly. I agree with you, Simon. I think there's a huge onus, actually, of responsibility to be placed on company directors with this. You know, we could talk a bit about apprenticeships and what have you in the future, but at the moment, well, as we said, there's no obligation to train, and you can make a living perfectly happily in the RMI market without paying any attention to retrofit. And why would you pay any attention to retrofit when there's such tiny demand that it's essentially zero? So I think if we're going to get there, we need to somehow find a way to take the workforce with us. We don't want people to be losing jobs, but we do want people to be doing work which they're competent to do, encouraged and enabled and subsidised to take on the learning that's necessary. And a lot of that, as I see it, could and should happen in apprenticeships and work placements and college. And so there's an onus on company directors, you know, some of the FMB members, to take on the role of, or take on more of a role of workforce training in association with colleges, etc. That whole system, how we build that system, is still an open question, and we need to get it right, because if we get it wrong, then we will just end up overburdening the already busy directors and putting people out of work and not giving them the opportunity to learn the necessary skills and knowledge. So there's a whole host of things there which we could talk more about. And yeah, detailed design is important. I think another set of key stakeholders in this discussion is going to be the colleges, the Association of Colleges, the different trainers. There are some innovators in terms of education and training on this call, you know, Peter Wickerby and Russell Smith and the Retrofit Academy, the BSI standards. Those are small pieces of a jigsaw, and we need far more pieces before the whole thing is complete.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, the other thing, as I mentioned, is about certainty, because I think you're right, Simon. Builders aren't going to be looking to train or upskill, whatever term we want, if there's a lot of work going on. But there are those who said they would invest. But of course, when schemes are introduced and then taken away, it sort of reinforces that view. Well, why bother? Because the market will be taken away or not get going. So it is something that needs to address, and why I think there needs to be a long-term view, which is what's come out in the report.
And I think,
Claire,
right, sorry, can I just come
sorry.
back? I think
Yeah,
we had over 5,000 businesses applied to come into the Green Home Grant Scheme, which is a short-term scheme. You know, 700 made it through that qualification process. Mm-hmm. So we did see numbers increase, but I think we've also got to be really careful. And you know, I absolutely support getting the localized, trusted person to be the deliverer of RMI and retrofit moving forward. But I think we also need to divide this up into short, medium and longer term, you know, because actually what a lot of businesses are looking for now is that certainty today, not 12 months, 24 months, 48 months down the road. You know, it's about the investment into making these things happen. And I think that's one of the key things that we've got to address in that process as well.
Yeah, no, fair point, Simon. I'm going to bring in some others because obviously I want to open it up. Claire, do you want to come in?
Yes, hi, thanks. And thank you, Gavin. Claire Price from BSI. Yeah, I couldn't agree more about competence. And there is a lot of work being done post-Grenfell under the Building Safety Act around competence roles in the built environment. And I know there's a lot of work being done on the installer role, which I think is probably really important here. I mean, there are these new roles that are coming out of the work that we've done and the PAS 2035 and the retrofit coordinator and so on. And it's not really clear at the moment how that connects to perhaps the principal designer or contractor roles that are coming through. And I think that all needs clarifying, really, and certainly we've raised it with the retrofit standards task group within BSI, and to actually start to look at establishing competence requirements for the retrofit players, the participants who are delivering it. And I think there's just such a lot of impetus in this area at the moment that it'd be really good to be able to sort of piggyback on that and actually use some of that activity to really work here as well.
Thanks, Claire. Gavin, did you want to comment on that, or no? Okay. All right. Claire?
Fair comment.
Fair comment. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Claire, for raising that. Chris, do you want to come in?
Yes, Brian, thank you. This is to follow up on your earlier remarks about field trials. Before I do that, absolutely support everything that's been said about the importance of technical competence, but there's a huge field trial underway in Wales at the moment called the Optimised Retrofit Programmes, 2,000 homes being upgraded and everything's being measured to the nth degree, both the technical and the social and the economic outcomes. What the principal lesson that's been learnt in Wales so far is this is not a technical issue at all, it's a people issue. The technology aspects of it are dead easy compared with the people aspects of it. So we mustn't forget that.
I'm sure that's very challenging.
If somebody won't let you in their home, you can't upgrade the home. It's got to that level.
Yeah, which is why I'm always worried about, well, you know, I said at the beginning about industrialization. Each home is unique, and that's why I like the idea of the passport, that you can actually allow homeowners to actually do as little or as much as they want within the policy framework that the government sets now and in the future. Does anyone actually have any question about the building passport? Because I think that is an interesting idea, and it's linked into the EPCs that you raised, Gavin, wasn't it, at the beginning? Sam, do you want to come in?
Hello, thank you. And thank you for the report, very interesting. So I had several questions. One was around sort of how you might phase these things in over time, because they're all kind of presented as you need everything, but I think it's worth thinking through when and how you might introduce these. I think that speaks slightly to kind of Chris's point around you kind of need to take people with you on this. It's quite a transition, and therefore sort of there's a significant role for sort of ensuring that you've got sort of strong public buy-in and understanding to kind of get that engagement and let people in through the door. So there's a timescales question. There's a question for me around minimum standards. We've said that we're looking at introducing minimum standards across 10 years, and have committed to look at what we can do around regulatory options for owner-occupied homes. You talked about a kind of a minimum standard around the point of sale, so it'd be interesting to understand how you would envisage that working. And then my final question is something around the kind of financial incentives and the kind of carrots you might have here. And you talked about loans, but it'd be interesting to understand what specifically you were sort of thinking about in the loans context. Were there particular examples or things that you think we should be looking at and learning from?
Yeah,
I'll respond quickly if I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Sam. lots of interesting questions. I don't have time to answer them all. I don't think I could answer them all. I think the key is engage with the stakeholders. So how long would it take and how would you implement it? The lessons from market transformation in other domains is that it does require long-term engagement. It requires a juggling act of being both simultaneously tough with the standards and making industry understand that this is coming down the road, but also understanding enough and giving enough time for the investment and the change to take place over time, but not the stop-start approach that we've seen, because the stop-start approach is the thing which undermines confidence more than anything else. There are examples of loan schemes in other countries. France, Germany, other places have had loan schemes better than ones we've had here. Having said that, neither France nor Germany have completely cracked the market for retrofit either. So it is tricky, but I think the private sector, there's lots of private finance that sees an opportunity in this market, like I said before, but at the moment they see it as too risky in terms of a financial risk. And I think that goes back to this piece about the builders and the quality assurance. If we had better quality assurance and good quality EPCs based on proper surveys, then we might see some serious private sector investment coming in. But yeah, it's a process of engagement and lots of stakeholders to understand. I'm sorry, that's not an easy answer, but I think that's the honest answer.
And maybe some sort of political commitment to actually drive it forward would be helpful. Anyway, I'm conscious that time is running out, and so Alice, would you like to come in?
Very briefly, to respond to Sam's very important point about timescales, actually, and the need for signalling and consistency is important. But I think what the report proposes around an area-based focus offers us a way of managing the timescales, not doing everything to 26 million homes in the next 5 years. But there are some locations where this combination of politics, need, supply chain are more amenable to rapid learning than others. So I would say that a key part of getting this phased approach is to really allow areas to develop the field-based the field trials at scale, and that will give us the learning to move forward. The issue, of course, will be about equality of offer and inclusion in driving that forward. But I think that's a pragmatic thing that the area-based approach gives us.
Thanks, Alice. And I was just thinking about, obviously, the UK is much more devolved, but these issues, I mean, we heard about Wales, it's about learning from each country, isn't it, rather than duplicating things, and how we can get this learning into other parts of the UK, the home nations. And I don't know if anyone's aware of any sort of duplication, but that, or whether there's some sort of forum for sharing all these ideas. No, well, it's just maybe it's one for government, UK government to be thinking about as well. Andy. I think you're on mute, Andy. Sorry.
Sorry, I clicked it. It was just on that point of forums. I know that there's an awful lot of organisations and projects building out different elements of the agenda, and I think that there is a big opportunity for those to come together. And I know that the likes of the UK Green Buildings Council are really keen on that coming together of practitioners and experts. Yeah. Yeah,
well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because I'm sure it must be happening in practice. Otherwise, we'll all be going off doing our own different things, and yet the problems are not unique to any one country. They are they apply all across the UK. Thank you, Andy. Joshua.
Thanks very much. I had a quick question, which was just, I guess, about the combination of skills between low carbon heating and energy efficiency. One of the things that I've come across in our research at IPPR has been that there isn't as much of a joined up approach as there could be. and from a consumer perspective, having installations at the same time would probably be a lot more ideal than having energy efficiency kind of done separately to installation of heat pumps or another low carbon heating situation solution. So I guess my question would be whether the panel kind of considered that to be an issue, and if we've sort of looked at this fabric first approach, is there a way to make things low carbon heating ready, if you like, or is that something that actually isn't as much of an issue because the two different types of installation are pretty compatible with each other?
I can answer that quickly if you like.
Yeah, sure.
It's a really good point. In the future, there might be all sorts of innovations at a sort of neighbourhood scale with heat networks or other bits of the energy system. And whatever's done on homes needs to be somehow compatible with that. So, we're moving into a world pretty much as Scotland has said, that homes are infrastructure. And this is part of the energy system. So you need to have the whole thing joined up. Whether we need separate skills, I mean, I personally think we need the foundation course so that people understand the whole piece first. I would argue it's possibly a little bit further down the road whether the delivery is done at neighbourhood scale with strong involvement of a local authority and an energy network which is managed by a new social enterprise. That could be one possible model, and the retrofit workers in that particular place would fit in with that model and might work very closely with that as a local energy supply system. But in other markets, in other regions, it could be very different. And our starting point is very much a highly private building stock and very fragmented delivery achieved by lots and lots of small and micro businesses. So we need to start on the integration process. If it comes to the point where that leads to things happening at neighbourhood scale and quality being achieved and integration between demand and energy supply, fantastic. But I think we can achieve quite a lot without having to go that step of the neighbourhood approach all at once.
Okay, thanks, Gavin. And I'm conscious of the time because we know 5 o'clock, but I'm going to bring you in, Andy, because your hand has been raised. So this will be the last point.
I was just, thank you. I was just going to say, I think we'll be getting some very interesting findings coming out of Wales. I don't mean to mention Wales again because Chris already has, but we're working with Western Power Distribution to look at how one of the things I think I skim read the report, so apologies if I've missed it, but one of the things I think that would be useful to emphasise is the need for a future plan for the home. The passport being talked about is historic records. We need to look for a pathway to zero for that home, and where we're looking with the likes of Western Power and in future other DNOs is how that pathway to zero can help the grid anticipate future demands as well as inform the home as to what it can do to support that grid. It's beginning to move homes into harmony with the grid, and that really is the way that we can get to net zero in a pragmatic way.
Andy, thank you for that. Yeah, we're well over 5 o'clock, and I'm sure we could carry on much longer because it's such a big topic and there's so much that needs to be done. But I want to thank Gavin in particular for putting this report together along with all the others that have been part of the team. As Gavin mentioned, the report is being officially launched tomorrow. So I do hope you'll all play your part in communicating, promoting the report and its findings. And obviously, we need to be talking to the politicians and the civil servants about the outcome of this as part in the lead up to COP26 and feeding into the heat and building strategy, something we'll be doing within the FMB and also within the Construction Leadership Council. So we'll be sending out more details as well to help along that journey. But if no one's got anything else to add, I will thank you for attending this afternoon and for your time and contribution, which has been very interesting and very much valued in helping the debate. So thank you very much, everyone.
Hi, Amy. I was just going to say that I'll send you the screenshots that I just took and the recording and things.
Thank you. You thought it went well.